afternoon. This is Hooting Yard on the air. I've been thinking of changing the name of the show to Worse Things Happen at Sea, but we'll see how we get on. Do worse things happen at sea? I don't know. My name is Frank Key. This is Hooting Yard on the air at 4 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon, as ever. 2 days ago was the 41st anniversary of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And that being so, I thought it was appropriate to pose some of the questions about that day in Dallas which remain unanswered. Perhaps they're unanswerable. For example, did the citizens of Dallas refer to the grassy knoll as the grassy knoll before it became known as the grassy knoll? Or did they call it a grassy knoll, or that grassy knoll, or even that patch of grass over there in Dealey Plaza? Similarly, was the white picket fence known as that white picket fence, or just that fence? Did his family, friends and acquaintances address Umbrella Man as Umbrella Man prior to the 22nd of November 1963? The same question can be asked of Badge Man, and indeed of Mary Moon Man, or as some commentators on the assassination have it, Mary Moon Man or Mormon. We know that future POTUS Richard Milhouse Nixon flew out of Dallas suspiciously on the morning of the assassination. Was he accompanied by his dog Checkers, or had Checkers already passed to the other side by then? Elderly dressmaker Abraham Zapruder famously shot the Zapruder footage on that sunny November day in Dallas. But who decided to dub it the Zapruder footage as opposed to, say, the Zapruder film or Zapruder's cine film? The cinema in which Lee Harvey Oswald was apprehended was showing the film War is Hell, starring Van Heflin at the time. Was Mr. Heflin part of the conspiracy, if indeed there was a conspiracy? A question with wider implications relates to the practice of assassin nomenclature. When was it decided, and by whom, that the assassins of POTUSes, or POTI, should invariably be given their full three names, as in Lee Harvey Oswald and John Wilkes Booth? Why is this also accorded to the assassins of whining Liverpudlian pop singers, Mark David Chapman, but not to successful unsuccessful POTUS assassins, John Hinckley, unless they're members of the Manson cult, Lynette Squeaky From? And is Sirhan Sirhan's middle name also Sirhan? Continuing with the JFK theme, here is a craft project. Build your own plasticine model of Dealey Plaza. First, get some plasticine. Before opening the package, wash your hands thoroughly in warm water. If your hands are really grubby, for instance, if you have been doing grubby things, use Swarfiga. I am making no moral judgment on your indulgence in grubby practices, merely noting that warm water by itself will not suffice to cleanse the pollution from your fleshly extremities. As for your immortal soul, far be it from me to pronounce upon the peril in which it is placed by your unconscionable grubbiness. After all, I am no saint. That being said, I abhor the kind of grubbiness to which you may have fallen prey, albeit that I do not make it my business to go about declaring my own rectitude, as that would be boastful. Once or twice, maybe, I have dipped my toe in the slimy puddle of moral turpitude, and that was quite enough for me. Now, to the second stage of this exciting project. With your prayer book or catechism resting upon the work surface in easy reach, open the packet of plasticine. Intone 3 Hail Marys, break off some plasticine and begin to mould it into the shape of the grassy knoll. It is advisable at this point to go and fetch your rosary beads. Before completing the grassy knoll part of the model, open up that tin of Swarfiga and clean your hands again. You can never be too careful. When you have made a passable model of the grassy knoll, take some matchsticks and press them into the plasticine to represent the white picket fence. Say a novena. Now, grab another chunk of plasticine and fashion a miniature version of the Texas Schoolbook Depository. Remember to tweak a tiny tubular shape poking out of the 6th floor window to show Assassin Lee Harvey Oswald's mail-order Mannlicher Carcano rifle with which he shot the POTUS, allegedly. A pink blob of plasticine will do for Jackie Kennedy's pillbox hat. The underpass over the Stemmons Freeway is quite tricky to make out of plasticine, so you may wish to use a few bits of cardboard. Your local supermarket probably has packaging and boxes piled up somewhere for customers to take away. Go and get sufficient boxes to cut enough cardboard for the underpass, and while you're out and about, drop into your nearest Catholic church and make your confession to Father O'Flaherty. If your priest has a different name, don't worry. If you don't have a priest, do worry, for you will burn in hell, however skillfully you manage to complete your plasticine and cardboard model of Dealey Plaza. When you return home, your soul now washed clean of all disgusting vileness, put the finishing touches to your model by curving a rectangle of plasticine into the shape of the pergola from where the Zapruder footage was shot. If you have exhausted your tin of Swarfiga, plunge your hands into a basin of piping hot soapy water while contemplating the martyrdom of your favourite saint. Place your toy Dealey Plaza in a suitable location, for example the mantelpiece, display cabinet or kitchen table. Next time Father O'Flaherty visits, ask him to sprinkle some holy water on it. He will be happy to oblige, I am sure. The nights are drawing in, and winter will soon be upon us. Remember the long ago days when people made their own entertainment? Oh, what fun was to be had. Here are two completely genuine items from an anthology of parlour games published in the late 19th century. And I think you'll agree that the excitement level that playing these games would induce would be marvellous. The first game is called Button Button. The players sit round the room in a circle. The leader then holds a button between his hands with the palms pressed together so as to hide it. He goes around the circle, passing his hand between those of the players. As he does this, he says, "Hold fast to what I give you." He is careful not to let the players see into whose hands he passed the button. The circuit having been made, the leader says to the first player, "Button, button, who has the button?" The one questioned must answer, naming someone whom he thinks has it. So it continues until all have had a turn at answering the same question. Then the leader says, "Button, button, rise." The button holder must do this. That's it. That's the game. That's the entire game. The second game is just as exciting. It's called Progressive Puzzles. Provide as many small square cards as there are guests, also several pairs of scissors. The party seats itself in a circle. The cards and scissors are given out. Then each player cuts his card twice across, so as to make 4 pieces. The straight cuts must intersect each other. After the first cut, the pieces must be held together until the second cut has been made. A player mixes his pieces and passes them to his right-hand neighbour. When the leader gives the signal, all the players put together the 4 pieces they have. The one who first succeeds calls out, "Ready!" Then all stop and pass the cards on again. The successful player is given a mark on a tally card. The game goes on until a half hour has passed. The person receiving the most marks is entitled to a prize or may become the leader as preferred. Here is episode 3 of The Horrible Cave. The story so far. The narrator is convinced that crows, which have been attacking people, have nested in the horrible cave. On the way to inform the local bird inspectors, he suffers a blow on the head, causing amnesia, and the next thing he remembers is coming to in some sort of clinic or bewilderment home. He decides to flee and changes out of his pyjamas into a boiler suit. On the lawn of the home, when he stops to inspect some crocuses, he is accosted by the famous irredentist Fabrizio Pabstus. And here now, The Horrible Cave, episode 3. Along with Blenkinsop and De Groot, Pabstus was the man who brought rigour to the study of animals' bones back in the 50s. I wondered what he was doing, wandering disconsolately around the garden of a bewilderment home, for that is where I assumed I had been plunked. Before I had a chance to ask him, he began to jabber questions at me about the horrible cave. After 15 or so queries, all of which I answered as best I could, Pabstus changed tack and asked me why I was dressed as a giant bee. For my part, let me say it had not escaped my notice that the world-famous irredentist was clad in raiment of the utmost gorgeousness. We seemed to have struck an instant rapport, so we strolled off together towards a nearby pie shop, which, Pabstus informed me, he had eaten at every single day for the last 30 years. When we entered the place, I pondered his judgment, for the floor was alive with scurrying beetles, huge, black, terrible things, and the air was thick with the smell of hamster. Seeing me about to swoon, Pabstus grinned, and I saw that his mouth was packed with fangs. There seemed to be too many of them to fit, but my eyes did not deceive me. "You have an alarming number of teeth, Pabstus," I observed. "No more than any other member of my extended family," he replied, tapping a bell upon the counter to summon the pie shop person. I have had a long and full life, but never before had I heard so dreadful a sound as that bell. I clapped my hands over my ears and began to weep like an oversensitive orphan child. Pabstus saw my discomfort and bared his fangs at me again. The hideous Beelzebub-esque bell-pealing faded, but only once the sound had died completely did the proprietor appear. I had expected some sort of jolly figure like Mr. Doe the baker from a deck of Happy Families playing cards, but the pie shop person looked and acted more like a fop of the Regency period. He even wore gloves scented with lavender. With a rakish twinkle in his eye, he greeted us, and somehow made the words, "Good afternoon, would you like to buy some pies?" sound lascivious. "Yes, we would," shouted Pabstus at top volume. "For myself, I want to buy one of your big crinkle pastry dumpling and endive and chicory pies, and 2 small mustard balls. My colleague here will have..." And he trailed off, inviting me to complete our request. Not having been to this particular pie shop before, I had no idea what I should choose, and there seemed to be no menu visible. But I began to sense inexplicable danger and wanted to get out of here as soon as I could. "I'll have the same," I announced weakly. "That won't be possible, I'm afraid," said the pie fop. "As you must surely know, today is St. Eustace's Day." I did not have the energy to argue. Perhaps that blow on the head which found me slumped in an unfamiliar armchair and suffering from amnesia had taken more of a toll than I thought. I pointed to 2 celery pies on a shelf behind the counter and asked for them. The proprietor preened his locks with macassar oil and said, "Those pies are for rental only." Beetles were now climbing up the legs of my borrowed bee-like boiler suit. I could stand no more of this. I turned and left the pie shop, slamming the door behind me. I decided that I would rather go hungry than allow myself to fall under Pabstus's spell. It was a decision I would learn to regret. Assuming that the limping irredentist would pursue me as soon as he had got his hands on his pies, I flung myself into a ditch and covered myself with a flag that happened to be lying about. I was surprised that the flag had been abandoned, for it looked as if it had been stitched only recently, and there was still a needle attached to a dangling piece of thread. I accidentally prodded myself with the needle in the general area of my right collarbone and had to stifle a yelp in case Pabstus was already on my trail. Crouched under a flag in a ditch in the early afternoon, I turned my thoughts once more to the horrible cave and to the crows that nested therein. It was a long, long time since I had been perturbed by birds, so long ago that I had difficulty remembering much about the days when my parents' toffee shop had been attacked by flocks of mutant sparrows and wagtails. But the malevolence of the crows I had seen near the horrible cave was unprecedented. Tippy Hedron had an easy time of it by comparison. I reflected ruefully, for I am given to rueful reflection, especially when I can feel silage seeping into my boots, as I could now. Could I risk standing up? I knew that if I maintained my crouch for much longer, I would suffer from agonising cramps, and I had left my cramp medication in the breast pocket of my pyjama jacket, back at the nursing home or whatever it was. I wondered if I could flee from the ditch and make it to the building without being waylaid by Pabstus. All of a sudden, that stuffy lounge with its creaking armchair, and Primrose the nurse with her mashed potatoes, even the rake-thin ghoul, seemed more attractive than this stinking ditch. Crawling out from under the flag, I peered over the lip of the ditch to check that Pabstus was no longer in the vicinity. He was not. Perhaps he had taken his pies and was sitting on a park bench, masticating them with those fangs of his, swallowing every last crumb. I clambered up and was about to stalk off towards the Mercy Home when I thought the flag might come in handy, so I stooped to pick it out of the ditch. It was heavier than I thought, but eventually I had it wrapped around me. As I turned to go, I saw that now my way was blocked by thousands of cows, all of them gazing at me intently, as if I were something they might want to chew up and digest. Were they cows, or were they super-intelligent beings from a planet in a distant galaxy who just looked like Earth cows? Within the next few minutes, I would learn the truth, a truth far more incredible than my puny brain could comprehend. It seems to be a very, very long time since I mentioned anything about Captain Cake. There are a couple of earlier pieces about him. Here's another one. Captain Cake had gone to sea in a battered and leaking ship. He drank his grog from a Bakelite cup. When he walked upon the orlop deck, he sang in vulgar Latin, and every morning he made the sailors pray at matins. The boatswain had a voodoo doll pierced with many pins, but Captain Cake had a jacket made of tin, and he made the boatswain walk the plank till he fell into the churning sea. All the sailors rollicked with glee. So Captain Cake sat in his cabin reading a book about gourds. Then they landed on an island of bloodthirsty hordes. The purser chucked the voodoo pins at the leader of these folk, who put down his sword and began to choke. Captain Cake wanted to be the island king, but they already had a god with bright and fluttery wings, and the god made the captain bow down on the sand. So, if you sail the hectic seas, be sure to understand that leaking ships can run aground at the drop of a hat. If only Captain Cake had realised that. Changing the subject entirely, here is an extract from Dobson's private journal, previously unpublished, never published as a pamphlet. This is an extract from Dobson's journal dated the 20th of November 1969, and he's actually headed it, Homage to Esther and Abby O'Farim. For the past few weeks, I have become increasingly fixated upon the young Israeli singing duo Esther and Abby O'Farim. Yesterday, I dug out a reel-to-reel tape recording device from a jumble of abandoned equipment in the broom cupboard and made a looping tape, or tape loop, I think it's called, of the pair performing Lord of the Reedy River. This is my favourite of their waxings, perhaps because in my dreams I like to think that I could one day be a lord or czar or baron or potentate of a reedy river. A very reedy river, a river so choked with reeds and weeds and thin stringy green flora that the water is brackish and its surface covered in scum. One imagines the smell of this river being quite unbearable and it being shunned even by dogs. The song appears on last year's long player Up to Date, copies of which I think I will give out as Christmas presents this year, whether the recipients want it or not. I'm toying with the idea of founding an Esther and Abby O'Farim fan club, although I suspect one already exists. Of course, The Lord of the Reedy River is only one of their great tracks. I have become convinced that if music has a future, these personable youngsters are the key to it. Another terrific thing about them is that so many anagrams can be made from Esther and Abby O'Farim, including Fat Horse Brain Media, Mashed Airborne Fiat, Bear Firm, O Satan, Die, Moira's Refined a Bath, Oh, Train Beside a Farm, Bards in Fire at a Home, For Thedabara is Mine, Hamster Foe in Bad Air, and A Basin of Mired Earth. I think that last one would make a great title for their next album, so if I can find out how to contact them, I'm going to write and suggest it. I suppose I ought to mention that Marigold Chew says their music is driving her crackers and she has decamped to a seaside resort, even though it is November and the weather is exceedingly inclement. She has not even told me to which confounded pebbly shore she has gone, so I am quite bereft, and only the dulcet tones of Esther and Abby singing Lord of the Reedy River, and indeed Sani Ku Zergalai, Purple Eyes and Akvormaland du Scorner are keeping me from flinging myself off a parapet, as my grandfather did when he could no longer cope with his aversion to breakfast cereals. A tragic episode told in full in my pamphlet Cornflakes, Ready Breck, Special K and Suicide, which I am sad to note is now out of print. When push comes to shove, I invariably topple over. If I'm standing on a precipice or at the edge of a gaping pit, this can be life-threatening. Thus, whenever my plans for the day include roaming in the vicinity of a yawning chasm, I take precautions by wearing a sort of winch and pulley affair, one end of which is wound around my torso under my vest, and the other end of which I hammer into a patch of firm ground using a great big iron mallet. I'm careful to ensure that this end of my winch and pulley is stuck fast in the earth, for if there is any chance of it working itself loose, the entire activity would be pointless. For if, heaven forbid, I were to topple when shoved, my efforts would have been in vain, for the crumbling or squelchy soil would yield up my winch and pulley, and I would surely topple as if I had never been attached to anything in the first place. That is such a terrible prospect that I make efforts to map out in advance the terrain in which I plan to wander, perhaps a week or so ahead. Of course, fugitive weather conditions can alter the state of the ground, as shown on my charts, but risk and chance play a role in all human affairs, and there's no reason why my roamings should be exempt. When setting out on my map-making expeditions, I usually attach one end of the winch and pulley to some stable object like a horse trough or a concrete sundial. My benefactors have long sought to deter me from straying near pits, chasms and abandoned mine shafts, so I'm afraid I've had to resort to subterfuge. As I wave to them from the garden gate, with the winch and pulley concealed behind a muffler, I say something like, "I'm just going out to check the concrete sundial," or, My, the day is so clement that I think I will stroll along a flat and featureless plain like the big field where Farmer Buzan used to grow his potatoes all those years ago." Sometimes such announcements will be met with questions, which I'm usually able to anticipate by peering at the furrowedness of my benefactor's brows. At other times I may have to improvise a convincing response or deflect the queries by pointing at a starling, for example, or forcing a sudden spray of projectile vomiting. When push comes to shove, pointing at a starling is my preferred option. It's 20 years now since I bashed in Farmer Buzan's head with his own spade. I like to think that my benefactors trust me these days, but it seems not. Oh look, there's a starling in that sycamore tree. Nearly time for the end of this week's show. I hope you've enjoyed it. Do visit the Hooting Yard website at hooting.yard.users.btopenworld.com. You don't need a www prefix. While you're there, have a read and go to the shop and buy things. And here's a quotation from Lafcadio Hearn's New Orleans Superstitions. It is dangerous to throw hair combings away instead of burning them, because birds may weave them into their nests, and while the nest remains, the person to whom the hair belonged will have a continual headache. I hope you haven't got a headache after that. See you next week.